All right, welcome back to the AI Factory. In this series, we're exploring the companies building artificial intelligence from the ground up. Over the past several weeks, we followed the AI Factory piece by piece. First came the AI cloud, then rack integration, advanced packaging, networking, and most recently, fiber optics. Last episode, we learned something that completely changed how many people think about AI infrastructure. One factory can contain nearly 1,000 miles of fiber optic cable. But today, we're going to go one step deeper because fiber does not create light, it only carries it. So, where does the light actually come from? And that question may be worth billions of dollars. Because if AI doesn't get light, it can lose up to 1,600,000 every single hour dollars. So today we're going to explore one of the most overlooked bottlenecks inside the AI factory, a tiny semiconductor material called indium phosphide. We'll learn why NVIDIA just invested billions of dollars into this part of the supply chain, why only a small group of companies have the expertise to manufacture these advanced laser technologies. And finally, we're going to use a 20-minute stock hunt 5-star delivery system to evaluate 3 companies that could benefit as AI continues to scale. So let's begin. Imagine building one of the largest AI factories in the world. You spend billions of dollars filling a data center with the fastest GPUs that money can buy. Everything is installed, everything powers on, and then half of those GPUs waiting, not because they're broken, not because they're overheating, they're simply waiting for data. That might sound like a small inconvenience, but inside modern AI factories, waiting is incredibly expensive. Think about that for a second. Some of the most expensive computer chips ever created doing absolutely nothing. Now imagine that happening across 10,000 GPUs. The financial impact becomes enormous. Industry estimates suggest that just 1% network-related downtime inside 10,000 GPU AI clusters can cost approximately $1.6 million per hour, not per day, not per week, but per hour. And that's why networking has quietly become one of the most important battlegrounds in artificial intelligence. For years, investors focused on compute. Companies like NVIDIA changed the world by building faster GPUs. But today, many AI experts believe the next bottleneck isn't computing power. It's moving data between those computers. Because every time thousands of GPUs need to communicate, information has to travel. And that journey is becoming harder every year. AI models continue getting larger. Training clusters continue growing. Hyperscalers continue spending hundreds of billions of dollars building new AI infrastructure. The problem is the technology used to move the information hasn't scaled nearly as fast, which raises an important question. If AI can lose over $1.6 million every hour simply because information isn't moving fast enough, what causes the slowdown? And the answer begins with something surprisingly ordinary, and that's copper. For decades, copper has been one of the foundations of modern networking. It's inexpensive, reliable, easy to manufacture, and for shorter distances, it still works extremely well. Inside many servers today, copper continues carrying electrical signals between nearby components. But artificial intelligence is changing the rules. Modern AI factories no longer consist of a few servers sitting next to each other. Today, training clusters can connect tens of thousands of GPUs operating together as one enormous computer, and that creates a completely different networking challenge. As electrical signals travel through copper, they weaken, they generate heat, and as speeds continue increasing, those problems become dramatically worse. Engineers can compensate for some of that signal loss, but every connection consumes more power, more heat, more complexity. Eventually, physics wins. And at the newest networking speeds, copper simply can't travel far enough before the signal begins to break down. And that means that worked perfectly fine 5 years ago, but it no longer works for today's AI factory. NVIDIA has already demonstrated this transition. Inside a single AI cabinet, copper still makes sense. It's short, efficient, cost effective, but once data needs to leave that cabinet and travel across multiple racks, copper reaches its practical limits. So engineers needed a better solution, not stronger electricity. They needed something completely different, and that was light. And that's where last week's episode comes back into the story, because fiber optic cable doesn't send electricity, it sends pulses of light. But that creates an even bigger question. If fiber simply carries the light, where does the light come from? And that's exactly where our story goes next. Last episode, we explored one of the most surprising facts about modern AI infrastructure. A single AI factory can contain 1,000 miles of fiber optic cable. That statistic alone is incredible, but here's something even more interesting. That entire network of fiber doesn't actually create anything. Fiber doesn't generate light, it simply carries it. Think of fiber optic cable like the interstate highway system. The highway doesn't create cars, it simply gives them a place to travel. Fiber works the same way. Instead of moving cars, it moves tiny pulses of laser light. And those flashes of light carry every instruction, every calculation, and every piece of information moving between thousands of GPUs without fiber. Modern AI factories simply couldn't scale. But today we're asking a different question. If fiber only carries the light, where does the light actually come from? Because without it, those thousands of miles of fiber optics are nothing more than expensive pieces of glass. And the answer begins with one of the most specialized materials in the semiconductor industry, a compound semiconductor called indium phosphide. And to understand why indium phosphide matters, let's first talk about silicon. Silicon is one of the most important materials in the world. It's the foundation of CPUs, GPUs, memory chips, and almost every computer you've ever used depends on silicon. Silicon is incredibly good at processing electricity, and that's why NVIDIA's GPUs are built on silicon. But silicon has one important weakness. It isn't very good at creating light. And that's a problem because once information leaves the GPU, it increasingly needs to travel as light instead of electricity. And that's where indium phosphide enters the story, or NP. Indium phosphide is a compound semiconductor made by combining two elements, indium and phosphorus. And unlike silicon, it naturally generates laser light with incredible efficiency. And that makes it one of the most important materials inside modern optical networking. Every time information leaves one AI server, travels across fiber, and arrives at another server, there's a good chance that journey began with indium phosphide lasers. And that's why I want you to remember one simple sentence. Fiber carries the light, and indium phosphide creates it. That single idea explains why this material has become so important. Without indium phosphide, the fiber optic network inside an AI factory cannot do its job. And without that network, thousands of GPUs begin waiting. Remember that our opening, over $1.6 million every hour. Suddenly, a material that most investors have never heard of becomes one of the most important pieces of the entire AI factory. But there's another reason the story is so interesting. Building these lasers is not easy. In fact, only a relatively small group of companies have spent decades developing the expertise required to manufacture advanced indium phosphide laser technologies for AI networking. And that creates something investors love, a high barrier to entry. Which brings us to one of the biggest questions in today's video. If indium phosphide has become this important, why did NVIDIA invest $2 billion into one of the companies building it? So let's find out. When NVIDIA announced a $2 billion strategic investment in Coherent,
long history with NVIDIA, and really what we're doing is working together to use photonics to advance the architecture of data centers, to find new innovation within data centers. And the key thing that photonics or optics brings is incredibly power efficient data transmission, because again, there's no more
as opposed to transferring via electrons.
Exactly.
Right.
So as you increase the data rates, as you increase the amount of data that's being transmitted, you have to, if you're using electrical today, eventually you'll hit a physics limit and you'll be kind of forced to switch to optical. And so we'll see more and more of the connections within the data center move to optical. And that's really where we come in. We're a global expert in photonics and optical communication.
The market is forward looking. They understood the copper to optical vibe for a few months, if not years, and your shares have shown that.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is Lumentum CEO was speaking at an event yesterday, Michael, and he was talking about, hey, even with scaling of their supply, they're still way back. They're falling further behind where demand is. Is that something similar for you as well?
Well, demand, there's no doubt, demand is incredibly strong, and that is both in the near term and in the long term. I mean, the forecasts that we're seeing from our customers, not just NVIDIA, but large hyperscalers, cloud service providers, are just exceptionally strong. And so what we are doing about that is we are rapidly expanding our capacity. I mean, we are building capacity as fast as we can.
What does that look like?
Yeah,
what sort of supply chain do you need?
going to say, just as one example, Ed, you asked about the lasers. Let's take the lasers.
Right. We all want to talk about lasers.
So if you look at the lasers, we're doubling our capacity this year, right? So we're coming out with twice as much indium phosphide. That's the key material underneath the lasers, but twice as much indium phosphide production. So we are ramping our capacity as fast as possible. Right. But back to, as we see more and more of the data center convert from electrical to optical, you've got kind of two big secular growth trends underneath us. And number one, the data center growth, but number two, this conversion of electrical to optical. And so that just generates an incredible amount of demand. So we're trying to stay ahead of that. We're ramping capacity. This NVIDIA partnership is part of that. That investment that they made into Coherent will help us ramp capacity faster and make sure that we've got the right capacity.
Ramp capacity where, right?
Many investors have focused on the dollar amount of $2 billion. But I think the more important question is, why? Why would the world's leading AI company invest billions of dollars into a company that doesn't manufacture GPUs? Because NVIDIA understands something that's becoming increasingly clear. The next AI bottleneck is not about just compute. It's about the photonics and the supply chain, or the photonic supply chain, and specifically the ability to manufacture the lasers that move enormous amounts of data between the AI clusters. Coherent has quietly become one of the most important companies in that supply chain. Its facility in Sherman, Texas, just north of Dallas, is home of the world's first high-volume 6-inch indium phosphide fabrication facility. And that might sound like a small manufacturing upgrade, but it's actually a major leap. Moving from a traditional 3-inch wafer to a 6-inch wafer increases the usable wafer area dramatically. Coherent estimates it can manufacture roughly 4 times as many laser devices per wafer while reducing die cost by more than 60%. That's exactly what hyperscalers need. More lasers, lower costs, higher production volumes. The company is now expanding that Texas facility even further, quadrupling production capacity to meet growing AI demand. And think about what NVIDIA is really buying. It's simply not buying lasers, it's future manufacturing capacity and priority access, supply chain security, and one of the few companies capable of producing this technology at scale. And that should tell investors something very important. When the largest AI company in the world starts investing billions of dollars into one part of the supply chain, it's usually worth paying attention to. And that leads us perfectly into the investment section of today's video. So let's start with the manufacturing leader, Coherent. First, we're going to start with what I believe is the manufacturing leader behind this entire trend, which is Coherent. If indium phosphide becomes one of the most important materials inside tomorrow's AI factories, Coherent is already one of the companies helping make that happen. And unlike many AI companies that focus on software or GPUs, Coherent operates much further upstream. The company manufactures lasers, optical materials, photonic components, and perhaps most importantly, it operates the world's first high-volume 6-inch indium phosphide fabrication facility in Sherman, Texas. And that's a big deal. Remember, every AI factory needs light, and that light starts with indium phosphide lasers. So by increasing the wafer size from the traditional 3-inch format to 6 inches, Coherent estimates it can manufacture approximately 4 times more laser devices per wafer while reducing die cost by more than 60%. And that's exactly the type of manufacturing improvement hyperscalers are looking for as they build larger and larger AI clusters. Even NVIDIA recognized how strategically important the technology had become. Earlier this year, NVIDIA announced $2 billion strategic investment in Coherent. And to me, that's one of the strongest validations of the entire indium phosphide investment thesis. NVIDIA isn't investing because Coherent makes GPUs. They're investing because they help remove one of the next bottlenecks inside the AI factory. Now let's look at the financials. Coherent currently has a market capitalization of approximately $66.5 billion and generates roughly $7.5 billion in annual revenue. The stock price is around $338. Its data center and communications segment recently grew by more than 40% year over year, making AI one of the fastest growing parts of the business. The trade-off, the growth is not free. Coherent is investing billions in expanding manufacturing capacity, and that has pressured free cash flow in the short term. But management believes those investments position the company for years of future AI demand. And now let's score Coherent using the 20-minute Stock Hunt AI Factory score. AI Factory exposure gets 5 stars. Few companies are more directly tied to one of the newest bottlenecks than Coherent. As AI networking expands, demands for advanced photonics should expand with it. The competitive moat. 5 stars. Manufacturing advanced indium phosphide technology isn't something competitors can simply copy. It requires decades of experience, specialized fabrication facilities, and deep customer relationships. And that's a significant competitive advantage. Next is financial strength, and it gets 4 of 5 stars. Revenue growth has been excellent. However, aggressive manufacturing expansion has temporarily pressured free cash flow. Long term, that investment may prove worthwhile, but it's still a risk investors should understand. Next is growth potential, and it gets 4 of 5 stars. AI networking remains one of the fastest growing areas of AI infrastructure. Between 800G, 1.6T, and eventually 3.TT networking, demand for photonics could continue growing for years. The valuation, 3 stars. This is not a criticism of the business, it's simply recognition that great companies don't always trade at bargain prices. And much of Coherent's AI opportunity is already reflected in today's valuation. So that gives Coherent an overall score of 4.4 out of 5 stars. So why this company wins? If AI networking becomes one of the defining bottlenecks of the decade, Coherent is already manufacturing one of the technologies needed to solve it. And that's exactly the type of company we're looking for inside the AI factory. So Coherent manufactures much of the technology, but another company specializes in turning that technology into higher performance lasers powering AI networks around the world. So let's move on to the AI factory company number 2, which is Lumentum. Now, if Coherent manufactures much of the technology, Lumentum helps bring that technology to life.
CEO Michael Hurlston. Michael, thank you very much for joining us here on the program. I want to put this conversation in the context of something we heard earlier from Advanced Micro Devices, and in their results, they said that now data centers have become the fastest growing or biggest driver of that growth story at AMD. Is data center activity now the biggest driver of growth at Lumentum?
100%, Tom. Our business is very much tailored to the data center. What we do is we connect compute that an NVIDIA, an AMD, and Intel provides and create these massive clusters that run these AI models and do all this inferencing you hear so much about. So that's what our company does. We transmit things over light. So we use light as the fundamental mechanism by which to do these connections. And that enables the speed that these compute clusters really need.
And, I guess, Michael, the story about the growth has for data centers has been very much centered around the hyperscalers, those kind of massive mega cap tech, media, and telecom companies that.
So think of it this way. Coherent helps build the engine, and Lumentum helps put that engine to work inside the AI factory. The company specializes in advanced laser technology used inside optical networking systems. And every time electrical information needs to become light, Lumentum is one of the companies making that possible. And demand has become extraordinary. Management recently stated that demand for AI optical networking components currently exceeds supply by more than 30%. And think about what that means. The bottleneck isn't finding customers. The bottleneck is manufacturing enough products to satisfy them. And that's one of the strongest positions a company can be in. More impressive, Lumentum says its laser manufacturing capacity is essentially fully allocated. And everything they're capable of producing, customers already want. And that's why management plans to increase manufacturing output by approximately 50% over the next year. The AI factory simply needs more light, and Lumentum is racing to supply it. And now let's look at the financials. Lumentum, the stock price is at $731 around today. Currently has a market capitalization of approximately $56.9 billion. The company recently reported record quarterly revenue of more than $808 million, representing approximately 90% year-over-year growth. Those are remarkable numbers, and very few companies are growing that quickly at this scale. Management also issued strong guidance while highlighting continued strength from hyperscale AI customers. And to me, that reinforces one important point. AI networking is not slowing down, it's accelerating. So now let's score Lumentum using the 20-minute stock hunt AI factory score. AI factory exposure gets 5 out of 5 stars. Lumentum sits directly inside one of the fastest growing parts of AI infrastructure. Without advanced laser technology, high-speed optical networking does not happen. Next, competitive moat, and it gets 4 out of 5 stars. Lumentum has decades of laser experience and expertise and long-standing customer relationships. And while competition exists, few companies have the engineering experience required to compete at this level. The financial strength of the company is 4 of 5 stars. Revenue growth has been outstanding. Profitability continues to improve, and the company appears financially healthy as AI demand expands. Next, you have growth potential. 4 of 5 stars. We're still early in the transition towards 800G, 1.6T, and eventually moving to 3.2T optical networking. And so that gives Lumentum multiple years of potential growth. An evaluation of 3 of 5 stars. Just like Coherent, this is an excellent business, but investors know that. High expectations mean the stock will likely remain volatile during periods of market uncertainty. And that gives Lumentum an overall score of 4.3 out of 5 stars. 1 point behind Coherent. Not because the business is weaker, but because Coherent's manufacturing position creates a slightly wider competitive moat, in my opinion. And now we've looked at 2 established leaders, but what if you're willing to accept more risk for potentially much greater upside? And that's where today's final company enters the story. Our final company is very different from the first 2. Coherent and Lumentum are already established leaders. Sivers is still building a story, and that's exactly why many investors are paying attention. With only about 130 employees, Sivers is tiny compared to companies like Coherent and Lumentum. But sometimes the biggest returns don't come from the largest companies. They come from the smaller companies successfully riding the same industry trend. Sivers focuses on advanced photonics and indium phosphide laser technology. with increasing attention on AI data centers. If AI networking continues shifting towards faster optical communication, Sivers believes it can become part of the supply chain. And one thing that caught my attention is the company's commercial opportunity pipeline. Management recently announced that pipeline has grown to nearly $800 million, an increase of it's an increase of roughly 77% since the beginning of the year. That's an impressive number for a company of this size. So now an opportunity pipeline isn't the same as revenue, and those opportunities still need to become customer orders. But it does suggest growing interest in the company's technology. Sivers also recently strengthened its balance sheet by converting debt into equity. That reduces financial pressure going forward. However, it also diluted existing shareholders, and that's an important reminder, as the stock price is now $4.86, where it was closer to $9 maybe just a month or two ago. High growth companies often require additional capital before reaching profitability. So now let's look at the financials. And unlike Coherent and Lumentum, Sivers is still relatively early in its growth journey. Revenue remains modest, the company is currently unprofitable, and management expects meaningful commercial production ramps over the next couple of years. So in other words, this is not a mature AI infrastructure company, as it is an emerging one. That means higher potential upside, but also significantly higher risk. So now let's score Sivers using the 20-minute stock hunt AI factory score. All right, the first is AI factory exposure, and it gets 4 of 5 stars. Sivers has meaningful exposure to AI photonics and indium phosphide lasers. However, it's still developing its position within the broader AI infrastructure ecosystem compared to larger competitors. Next, you got competitive moat, and it gets 3 of 5 stars. The company's technology is impressive, but unlike Coherent, it has not yet established the same manufacturing scale or customer relationships. That doesn't mean it can't. It simply means there is more execution ahead. Next, the financial strength of the company, 2 of 5 stars. And this is where the company loses points. Revenue is still relatively small, and the business remains unprofitable. And recent shareholder dilution reminds investors that growth still requires capital. Growth potential is 5 of 5 stars. This is where Sivers really stands out. If management successfully converts its growing pipeline into commercial revenue, the upside could be substantial. Small companies can grow much faster than larger companies, and that's what makes Sivers so interesting. So the valuation, you have 4 of 5 stars. And unlike Coherent and Lumentum, much less future success is reflected in today's valuation. Of course, lower valuation also comes with much higher uncertainty, and that gives Sivers an overall AI factory score of 3.8 out of 5 stars, lower than Coherent and Lumentum, but for a completely different reason. This isn't a quality issue, it's an execution issue, and the larger companies have already proven they can deliver at scale. Sivers still has to prove that, and that's exactly why it's today's emerging innovator. So notes are posted at buymeacoffee.com, and this is the rankings for today's video. Coherent gets 4.4 out of 5 stars. Lumentum gets 4.3 out of 5 stars and in second place. And in third place, Sivers gets 3.3 out of 5 stars, or 3.8 out of 5 stars. The best overall is Coherent. Strong contender is Lumentum, and Sivers gets the highest upside. Now you get 5 pages of what happened today, and those were one of 5 pages, including other companies that were reviewed for this video, and we scored in the notes. So today we followed one of the most important and most overlooked parts of the ecosystem in the AI factory. We learned fiber optic cable does not generate light, it simply carries it. And the tiny pulses of light begin with a remarkable material called indium phosphide. As AI clusters continue to expand, networking moves to 800G, 1.6T, and then eventually to 3.2T, the demand for advanced photonics will likely continue to grow. That doesn't guarantee every company is going to succeed, but it does explain why NVIDIA invested $2 billion into Coherent, and why Lumentum is expanding production, and why smaller innovators like Sivers are attracting more attention. So the goal of this series is not to predict the next NVIDIA, it's to understand where the bottlenecks are forming and identify the companies working to solve them, because throughout history, the companies removing bottlenecks have often created enormous value. So today we added another piece to the AI factory. But we're not done yet. The next question is just as important. And once the laser creates the light, how does that light actually enter the fiber and return back into electrical signals? The answer is a tiny device found inside every modern AI network. And that's the optical transceiver. And that's exactly where we're going next. If you enjoyed building the AI factory with me, be sure to subscribe, because we're only getting started. And if you want to go even deeper, don't forget to check out the AI Factory research notes, where I rank additional companies we considered, share extra research, and provide exclusive content for members. So thanks so much for watching. This is for entertainment purposes only, and we'll see you in the next one.